The Night Visitors. Eleanor Whitmore had never feared the dark. At 82 years old, she had survived things far worse than shadows. War, loss, the slow, cruel betrayal of her own body. Darkness was simply the absence of light. At least, that's what she had always believed. That changed the night they came. Hollow Pines Assisted Living was not a bad place. It wasn't particularly good either. It was old, built in the 1950s and never quite modernized. The air always smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The floral wallpaper in the hallways peeled at the corners, and the linoleum floors carried the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. The heating system worked when it wanted to, and the flickering fluorescent lights hummed like distant bees. For Eleanor, it had been home for the past 5 years. It was better than being alone. Her room was at the very end of the east wing, near the last window overlooking the overgrown courtyard. She liked the window. Most nights, she sat in her armchair and watched the wind stir the dead autumn leaves, listening to the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was comforting, familiar. Until tonight. The first thing Eleanor noticed was the silence. Not the normal nighttime hush, but something else. Something deeper. Wrong. The television in the lounge, which was always left on low volume for the sleepless residents, was off. There were no distant murmurs of nurses tending to patients. No sound of carts rolling down the hall. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock had stopped. She shifted in her chair, suddenly uneasy. "Hello?" she called softly. Nothing. A strange pressure built in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Eleanor's frail fingers trembled as she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand. Her hand stopped halfway. Something was standing in the doorway. A shadow. Motionless. Watching. It was tall. Too tall. Its limbs stretched too long, its shoulders unnaturally sharp beneath the tattered black fabric that clung to it. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though studying her. Eleanor's pulse hammered against her ribs. "Who's there?" No answer. The shadow glided forward. Not walked. Glided. The air turned frigid. Eleanor gripped the arms of her chair, forcing herself to move, to scream, to do something. But she couldn't. The figure stopped at the foot of her bed, close enough now that she could see the details, or rather, the lack of them. It had no face. Just an empty void where one should be, swirling like black smoke trapped beneath glass. It raised a long skeletal hand and pointed at her. Eleanor whimpered, "Please." Then it whispered. Not a voice exactly, but something deeper. More ancient. A sound like the rustling of dead leaves. "We come for the forgotten ones." Pain stabbed through Eleanor's chest like a knife. Then everything around her shifted. She was no longer in her room. The chair beneath her was gone, replaced by cold, sagging floorboards. The walls stretched long and endless, their wallpaper yellowed and peeling. The light above her flickered, casting twisted shadows that stretched and moved in ways that weren't natural. And she wasn't alone. Other figures lined the hallway, scattered like broken dolls. Some were old, their wrinkled faces frozen in silent horror. Others were younger, their hospital gowns tattered and stained. All of them were staring. Eleanor turned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What is this place?" A frail woman beside her whispered, Don't let them take you." Eleanor's fingers dug into her arms. Who are they?" The woman's sunken eyes darted toward the end of the hall. Eleanor followed her gaze. The shadows were moving. They peeled themselves from the walls, pulling free from the dark corners like ink spilling into water. Dozens of them. Their bodies twisted, stretching unnaturally as they glided forward. "We come for the forgotten ones." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The woman beside her grabbed her hand with fingers like ice. "You have to run. Run." She couldn't run. She could barely walk. But the figures were coming closer, their whispering voices scraping against her mind. Forgotten. Lost. Unremembered. No, she wasn't forgotten. Her daughter visited her every month. She always sent letters. There were pictures in her nightstand. Wasn't there? Eleanor's thoughts twisted, unraveling like frayed thread. She tried to picture her daughter's face, the color of her eyes, the sound of her laugh. Nothing. A blank space in her memory. Like something had reached into her mind and ripped it away. A scream tore from her throat as the shadows swarmed. Light flickered. And suddenly, she was back in her room. Eleanor gasped, her chest heaving. The room was warm again. The grandfather clock was ticking once more. Had it been a nightmare? A hallucination? Her trembling hands clutched the armrests of her chair as she forced herself to breathe. It wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. Then she saw it. On the floor near her bed where the shadow had stood. A single black feather. Eleanor stared at it, her blood running cold. She reached for the call button with shaking fingers and pressed it frantically. Moments later, Nurse Julia entered, her face lined with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore? What's wrong?" Eleanor opened her mouth but hesitated. What could she even say? That something had taken her? That she had seen others, trapped somewhere in the dark? Would they believe her? Would she believe herself? She swallowed hard and forced a weak smile. I just had a bad dream." Julia gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "That's all right. It happens. Try to get some rest, okay?" Eleanor nodded slowly, watching as the nurse walked to the door. Just as Julia was about to leave, she paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. Mr. Langley down the hall passed away in his sleep tonight." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She barely heard the rest of Julia's words. Something about it being peaceful. How they found him sitting upright in his chair, staring at the door. Eleanor's breath shuddered. She thought about the figures in the hallway. The whispering, the forgotten ones. She looked at the feather one last time, then carefully, silently, slid it into the drawer of her nightstand. Outside, down the hall, a door creaked open on its own. Somewhere, someone else was being visited. Because the forgotten ones always get their turn.
Thank you for watching. Go to next video.